Good afternoon. You're watching Businessworld Live. I'm Jes Delos Santos. Let's take a look at how the local bourse closed today, Monday. All right, some last-minute buying helped push shares higher today. Local stocks had a good start to Monday with a climb to 6,400 this morning, but things went downhill from there, even reaching a low of 6,348. But right before session closed, shares propelled higher by at least close to 0.2%. Still muted though, but enough for the main index to snap out of its 3-day losing streak. The benchmark ends Monday at 6,389.38 amid thin trading and a continuous dumping from offshore investors. Net foreign selling persisting today for the 17th day now. Net sales at 700.1 million pesos. Mixed picture, however, for local stocks. If we try to take a look at how our the members of our main index at least perform for the day. You have a number of stocks here gaining at least over 2% here. Globe, for one, the day's best performer, is up 2.7% to 1,920, as well as property player Mega World, which at least today inched higher by 2.6%. On the other hand, you have JG Sum, the day's worst performer, as you can see here, plummeting by 4.4%. Also, Aboitiz ending the day lower by over 2%. But I want to zero in on a number of banks here. As you can see, you have BPI, Metro Bank, and even Security Bank, some of the day's best performer. That's despite, of course, reports that non-performing loan ratio banks may actually breach 5% by year end. But that first might especially since the FIS law might actually help bank offload bad assets. That at least is according to the BSP. Recall and non-performing loans climbed to 4.05% in February. The counter still up by 1.1%. I'm talking about a financial gauge here with BPI ending the day up 1.8% to 83 pesos a piece. Metro Bank likewise also ending the day in the green, higher by 1.1%, as well as Security Bank. Now, one stock to watch for tomorrow would have to be Meralco. Right after close, they did release their financial performance for the first quarter of 2021. Net income rose by as much as 65% to 4.3 billion pesos. Net income revenue, likewise, however, is lower by 6.8% to 64.71 billion pesos. Core net income also declining 11% to 5.1 billion pesos. They did post, however, a strong growth here from the residential sector that is up 8% in terms of energy sales, especially in the NCR Plus area due to the reimposition of ECQ at least mid-March. Commercial sector, however, the commercial segment declined by 18%. But industrial staged a comeback here, climbing 4%, especially with steel and cement producers already in full operations, as well as manufacturing plants for essential goods already operating at a higher capacity. Those figures, again, like what I mentioned earlier, came in after close. Let's see how that's going to move Meralco tomorrow, which at least today ended flat at 275 apiece. Now, from local stocks, let's zoom out a bit to the economic front here. Economic managers earlier today, at least trying hard to inject some optimism into the country's growth prospects. You have our economic managers appearing in a pre-SONA Economic Development and Infrastructure Clusters Forum. BSP Governor Ben Jokno said the central bank will continue to aid the economy. He said recovery is already in its early stages and the current monetary setting should be allowed to seep through the economy. He added that banks can still withstand shocks and that lenders have adequate capital and low exposure to bad debts. He reiterated as well previous sentiments that inflation hitting above government target of 2 to 4% is just transitory. You also have Finance Chief Sonny Dominguez saying that they will maintain fiscal prudence even as they target to allot 5% of GDP on infrastructure. But a lot of the country's growth prospects will depend on what the next quarantine classification will be for the NCR Plus bubble. We are, of course, currently you have MECQ that's expected to end on April 30. But according to the health department, you have a number of experts presenting three possible scenarios here. That is, for one, put in place MECQ still for the whole month of May. And then another scenario would be to have MECQ until May 15, and then from then on it's going to be at least GCQ. And then another recommendation is to put in place general community quarantine for the entire month of May. But officials have yet to finalize that. The IATF is expected to meet at least to discuss their next move. But if the DOH would have it their way, they said that they see the importance of extending MECQ for 2 more weeks just so hospitals would be able to at least decongest some more. Now, there has been a shortage of semiconductor chips the world over. How is that constraining local electronic manufacturers? Let's find out from Semiconductor and Electronics Industries in the Philippines President Dan Lachica. Good afternoon, Sir Dan.
Good afternoon, Jes. Thanks for having me.
All right, so Sir Dan, what has led the industry, at least global semiconductor industry, to this point?
Well, the short answer is the pandemic. If you look back at last year, we were poised to grow the industry from a record of $43.3 billion in 2019 for a 5% growth in 2021, which would have put us at $45 billion. But then again, the Taal volcano eruption and more disastrous is the effect of COVID. It disrupted the supply chain. It shut down the industry for, at least a couple of weeks. We had a difficulty starting back up because of the restrictions. Eventually, government came to the rescue and allowed us to slowly operate from 30% to 50% to 100% capacity. By that time, though, there was already a ripple effect because of the shutdown in the Philippines. Many of the multinational countries shifted their volumes, say, to the tune of about 10% to their factories outside the Philippines. And more importantly, while there was some uncertainty in the demand, this demand continued to be strong. And so by the time we were able to get up to 100% capacity, we were just playing catch up. And this spilled over to the equipment side. So we were the typical 3 to 6 month lead time of semiconductor processing equipment grew to 6 months to almost a year. So even though we had a backlog in orders, it was extremely difficult for the companies to catch up with the orders because we just didn't have the capacity to do that. So it's a chain reaction which started in March of last year.
Currently, at least, how behind are you at this stage, sir?
Well,
Talking about backlogs.
To put in perspective, we actually did, we were, again, working with DTI and the government. We were able to play catch up of sorts last year because as of March and April last year, we were projecting a 20% contraction in the industry. So we were able to recover despite the continued supply chain disruption and impact on the workforce and raw materials. We were able to make up some ground and ended up the year with 5% contraction, which is much, much better than 20%. So we ended the year at $39.7 billion, where we should have been at $45 billion. So we needed to, there's at least $5 to $6 billion of order there that we can catch up with. But then again, like I said, even though we're running at 100% now, equipment capacity is a constraint. There's still some issues with materials in terms of delays at the port, just because of the congestion, not the congestion per se, but because of the backlog in orders, if you will. And of course, if you have infections in the agencies that address the supply, then you see a disruption there also. Because so when all is said and done, we could have easily made do with another $5 to $6 billion in orders, but because of the reasons I mentioned, materials, equipment capacity, delays, then we're still playing catch up right now.
Mhm. If I may ask as well, is a return to ECQ and now MECQ also at least compounded the problem?
Well, as I mentioned, the DTI, IATF, and even the LGUs and PEZA actually were very understanding. Actually, they treated manufacturing as essentials to the restart and growth of the economy. But we're doing this at a handicap with increased costs. For example, um, with the constraints of quarantine and the controls, we used to be able to run our shuttle operations at 100% capacity because we've installed partitions in between seats. But back to 50% capacity. So basically, there's an incremental cost of up to 10 million pesos a month for the big companies who shuttle their operations or to their operators, I said, just to keep up with the workload. And so while we're trying to get to 100% capacity, and for the most part we're doing it at extremely higher cost. Uh, the delays that we may be facing because of some glitches at the cargo release, um, some constraints there, and of course disruptions in the material supply chain basically add up to additional costs of doing business.
Mm-hmm. Now, Sir Dan, how is this going to affect prices for a range of products here, especially from TVs and even mobile phones and even, of course, cars?
Well, in fairness, what we do here is basically export to the assemblies or the components to the final assemblers and the parent companies, right? So we're not really going to see an increase in prices per se in the export products, but we will see an increase in operating cost and because for the additional logistics supply, logistics is already expensive as it is, but to expedite materials, say for example, instead of the typical sea shipment, we would resort to air shipment just to expedite the delivery of materials. Well, that multiplies the cost of materials by 10x just because we want to expedite them. I mentioned the cost of transporting the workforce, basically double the expenses there. So basically, it increases the cost of operations in the Philippines. And if you look at a multinational who has multiple facilities outside the Philippines, they're just going to compare their cost of operations. And there's a risk to eventually lose volume in the Philippines and get it transferred to the factories outside. But hopefully, this higher cost of operations will be, normalized. Hopefully soon, like you mentioned, that when we go to GCQ, hopefully we'll uh, facilitate the reduction of this cost, specifically for shuttle costs, reduce the backlog of cargoes at the ports, and contribute towards a lowering of the operating cost in the Philippines.
Okay, and lastly, now, Sir Dan, before I let you go, when do you expect this supply pressure to last? When are we expecting the supply gap to extend? And at the same time, how is this going to affect our outlook for the rest of the year?
Well, we were building momentum some February and March, and all of a sudden we get hit again with an increase in cases. And we understand that the electronics industry per se basically have has implemented very strict safety protocols in the factories and even in the shuttle buses. So we're not really seeing high incidence of infections in our clean rooms, in our clean factories. Whatever increases we see are basically coming out of the community when our workers are, go back to their barangays or whatever. So we understand that, and that's why we're complying with the regulations of the IATF. But the fact of the matter is, we may see, for example, ECQ improve to a GCQ, but for how long? So I guess the critical thing that we need to do, and the private sector is working with government on this, is to expedite the rollout of the vaccines. That way, hopefully, we accelerate the transition to a herd immunity. 70% are vaccinated. We know the government can do it by themselves. That's why we have that partnership with private sector in terms of ordering the vaccines. But I think um, without the vaccines, we'll still be victims to this high and lows of the infections. If we see another upsurge and we're forced to go to another quarantine, that's going to be very detrimental to the industry. So I think one of the critical things that needs to be done is to expedite the rollout of the vaccines between the government and private sector efforts.
Very quickly, Sir Dan, do you have a growth target for the year?
We're
And do you think it's still
expect,
achievable?
yeah, we expect a 5% growth for 2021.
All right. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon, SEIPI President Dan Lachica. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Jess. Thanks for having me. Take care.
Here are other headlines we're keeping our eyes on. Economists expect inflation to exceed the BSP's 2 to 4% target this year on the back of rising global crude oil prices. Central Bank survey of private sector economists for March showed higher mean inflation forecast of 4.2% in March. BSP's economic research team said analysts are expecting inflation to remain elevated in the near term due to upside risks, including the ASF outbreak, increased transportation costs, higher government spending, and renewed consumer demand. Inflation averaged 4.5% in the first quarter, above the government's 2 to 4% target. Now more on today's Sulong Pilipinas Pre-Zone of Forum 2021, NEDA Secretary Carl Kendrick Chua says growth prospects this year are encouraging and it could allow the economy to return to pre-pandemic levels by mid-2022. Chua says NEDA is maintaining its growth forecast of 6.5 to 7.5% despite the implementation of lockdowns. Chua explains the country has enough time to catch up on growth in the remaining months as long as enhanced quarantine is lifted and the economy is reopened on the appropriate time. But Central Bank Governor Ben Jokno is standing by his earlier forecast that the economy could only grow by up to 6 to 7% because of the implementation of ECQ in Metro Manila and nearby provinces. Other pillars of economic recovery include the timely implementation of the country's vaccination program and other measures under the recovery package.
Our recovery is slated starting this year, and we would achieve pre-pandemic level in 2022, middle of 2022. And all of these are needed to prevent long-term scarring and productivity losses. The reality today is the virus is not going to go away easily. 95% of our success lie in your personal behavior.
And those are the biggest stories this trading day, April 26, 2021. Catch Businessworld live again tomorrow at 9:30 a.m. for the market open and 3:15 p.m. for the market close. I'm Jes Delos Santos. We are One News. Mask on, wash hands, and stay safe, Philippines.